Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable discussion titled The Research Agenda of Harvard Art Museum's Straus Center for Conservation and Technical Studies. This session is serving as the launch of the second module of the Conservation Science Training and Research, or CoSTAR program. My name is Salman Rafe, and I'm the program manager at the Lakshmi Mittal Family South Asia Institute here at Harvard. Before turning it over to our speakers, I just wanted to give a few house rules. We'll be primarily doing this in the webinar format, so we're very glad we can have people joining us from around the world today for the session. You can submit questions for our speakers via the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll incorporate that in the discussion that happens towards the end of the session as well. We'll also be able to take questions from the audience using the raise hand function on Zoom, and we'll be able to call on speakers or call on audience members to speak at that time. If you have any questions about the session, you can also send messages to us or to me via the chat or Q&A function, and we'll also be posting key links and details in the chat for you to view as well. Other than that, I'll turn it over to Anupam to start off the session. Anupam, thank you for joining us today and for leading the session.
Thank you very much, Salman. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to all the participants of the previous programs and the fresh members in the audience who've joined us today. I take this opportunity to, first of all, remember all the trials and tribulations that all of us went through and during COVID times, and as mankind and nature is resilient, and we've all surfaced through it, and we take forward our common human endeavors, and this little program is in that continuum, so to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Dr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, the Director General of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, which is the CSMVS Museum in Mumbai, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege for me, in fact, to welcome all of you to this evening. The CSMVS has joined hands with the Lakshmi Mittal South Asia Institute and Harvard Art Museums to put together this program, which is called CoSTAR. That's Conservation Science Training and Research Program. And the first thing to do appropriately would be to introduce to the actual star of this program, our very own lovely Meena Sonia, who until very recently was the executive director of the Mittal South Asia Institute at Harvard, where she served for 11 years, almost 11 years. And she led and designed several multidisciplinary programs, research programs with faculty that came from the humanities, the arts, social sciences, and the pure sciences. And she's the one who initiated the idea of the arts program at the South Asia Institute. And if there's a lady who I know who's persistent and who has got drive and she's got a sense of commitment to deliver something, that is her. Ladies and gentlemen, Meena Sonia. And Meena, may I request you to please have the grace us with the opening remarks for this, to give us a little idea of the genesis of this program.
Thank you, Anupam. That was a very generous introduction. I'm so happy to be here and extend a warm welcome to all of you. I'm seeing so many names who have been with us in the past CoSTAR Module 1 program, and I'm so excited that you're joining us again. So welcome back to them, and warm welcome to others who are joining us for the first time. As Anupam mentioned, I used to work with the Mittal South Asia Institute, and I'm so committed to this program that I have borrowed my time from where I'm working currently to continue to work on CoSTAR. And so a little bit about the Mittal Institute at Harvard. It's an institute that focuses on South Asia as a region. And the idea is to bring scholars, experts, and practitioners from different disciplines to come together to solve really complex problems. And so, you know, heritage conservation sort of falls very much within the mandate of the South Asia Institute. So just like, you know, the mandate of the Institute is to bring people together with different expertise. the idea of CoSTAR sort of emerged from that, which is how do you solve the complex problem of, one, the plethora of heritage and artifacts that India, South Asia has, and how do you bring the different silos, people working in silos, how do you bring them together to share knowledge and share resources? Because something that's so complex will require cross-disciplinary solutions. So that's how CoSTAR sort of emerged. And with me was, of course, Anupam and Mr. Mukherjee from CSMVS Museum in India, who began to anchor what we were setting out to do, without whom, again, this program would not have been possible. And then, of course, Narayan Khandekar from the Harvard Art Museums. You get the best of the best in the world to partner with us, along with Professor Gina Kim, who's an art historian teaching at Harvard. So it was, in some ways, it was just a beautiful sort of bringing of amazing minds together to launch CoSTAR, which is the conservation of science, training, and research. And we started our first module, which consisted of 9 weeks. And the idea was to bridge the museum studies, art conservation, and conservation science. And then, as Narayan had put it, how do you communicate art history to scientists? And how do you communicate the science behind it to non-scientists? So that's essentially what we had set out to do. And lastly, what were the different approaches to understanding the technical side of, conservation of tangible and intangible heritage? So that's essentially what it was, which was very much, if you think of it, was like a survey of all the different solutions and problems. Now we're going to start thinking about the second module, which I'll let Anupam speak more about. And we're so excited that within the same year, we were able to actually launch our module 2, which will do a little bit more, take it a little further, where you're actually going to be doing more hands-on stuff. And I'll let Anupam speak more about that. But without further ado, just a quick thank you to all the people who work behind the scenes to make this program happen. The partnership between the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, CSMVS Museum, and the Harvard Art Museums. And then last but not the least, all the folks who've actually participated in the program. Without you, no matter how much work we did behind the scenes, it would not make any difference. So thank you so much for your collaborative spirit, and to all the active participants without whom this program would not have taken shape. So thank you so much. And I'm going to, again, hand it back to you, Anupam.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much, Sonia, Meena. It's a pleasure for me now to introduce 3 panelists first. For the Angela Chang. Angela is here. Angela, in fact, did a lovely presentation on the Shotoku sculptures during the module 1, and the participants are still talking about it. So thank you very much, Angela, for that. Angela, in fact, is the Assistant Director, Conservator and Conservative Objects and Sculptures at the and Head of the Objects Lab at the Straus Center. And as Assistant Director, she works with Narayan, who I will introduce before Narayan speaks. Chang has been playing an important role in in implementing best practices in preventive conservation, and her research interests, which she has many. Some of them are preventive conservation, engagement with artists to draw their techniques and materials, especially of ancient Chinese jades in the museums, various collections. Angela will be one of the panelists in this session, along with welcome Angela Chang. And then we have also Penley Knipe. She's the Philip and Lynn Straus Senior Conservator Works of Art on Paper and Head of the Paper Lab. She studies and preserves the museum's various collections, especially on paper and photographs. she's worked with Dutch, Flemish drawings, Islamic paintings, and as that Shotoku case study showed, also fragments of paper which are found within other artifacts. She was also the chair, Penley was also the chair of the book and paper group of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. And Penley teaches along with her colleagues at various programs that are run here at Harvard. Welcome, Penley. Warm welcome to you. And we have also with us Kate. Kate, very good evening, Kate. Hi, Kate. Kate is conservator of paintings and head of the paintings lab at the Harvard Art Museums. And her the area that she's covered in her in the work that she's done, they come all the way from the Roman frescoes fragments to contemporary oil paintings, and a great asset for her also for this program is because she specializes in the technical examination of paintings using various techniques like radiography or infrared reflectography, luminescence imaging, and investigates artists' materials and techniques. She too teaches at the Straus Center with her Straus Center colleagues at the Harvard courses, the ones that are focused on conservation. So welcome, Kate. Welcome to all three of you. Welcome to all three of you. And now, you see, we are, it's winter time here. Well, in India, well, also there in the United States, it's winter time. And it's actually just setting in India. But I think we here at CoSTAR are already like preparing for a spring, Narayan. We're preparing for a spring of fresh leaves and blossoms of conservation science in the Indian subcontinent. It's always been there a little bit, but you need just the right amount of atmosphere, so to speak, and for things to burst forth in all their glory. And for that, it is in no small measure that I have to thank you, Narayan, for being such a gracious mentor for this program, for guiding us and supporting us in your inimitable, very underplayed manner. And we are truly very grateful to you. And it is with this that I introduce Dr. Narayan Khandekar, ladies and gentlemen, who's the director of the Straus Center for Conservation and Technical Studies, Harvard University. Narayan has been leading the conservation and research activities here, and also for the Center for the Technical Study of Modern Art at the Harvard Art Museums. Specializes in the scientific analysis of paintings and painted surfaces. And in fact, this first step of the CoSTAR Module 2 is analysis of painted surfaces. And we are very happy that Narayan has agreed to be with us again, because he has already coordinated so many international groups on conservation science, that is so many advisory committees, and the most beautiful Forbes pigment collection and the Gettins collection of binding media and varnishes is all under his curatorial charge. Ladies and gentlemen, Narayan Khandekar. Narayan, may I ask you to launch this program with your keynote remarks, and then you can bring in all of us panelists together to have a conversation.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Anupam, for that very, very kind introduction. And I hope what I say has enough fertilizer for the buds of conservation science to blossom. I wanted to start off by just introducing who we are, the Straus Center for Conservation. And it's a department of the Harvard Art Museums. The Harvard Art Museums has a collection of about 250,000 objects, which is a very big collection in the United States. It's one of the biggest collections. And it's embedded in Harvard University. And in our mission of what we do in the museum, research is mentioned. It's there as a core activity of the work that we do in the art museums. And it's been that way for a very long time. In the Straus Center, which started almost 100 years ago, we've been doing technical art history, the study of materials and techniques of artists from the 1920s. And that was part of the very earliest work that we do. And it's part of the work that we still continue to do. And it's a core activity. It's something that we must do. It's something that we share with people. It's something that we collaborate with people about. We have to also coordinate and manage the projects as well. And we're going to talk about that as well as maybe some of the challenges that we face. I'm very grateful to Angela, Penley and Kate, who have agreed to talk with me as well, because I think a conversation about how we operate, and we've all worked together for, I think, 20 years, probably thereabouts, maybe slightly less, but we've all worked together for a long time. So we have a very good understanding, very good collaborative approach to how we work together. And I wanted to share that with you as an audience. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of research projects we work on as well. So we have short-term projects, which range from 6 to 8 months long, medium term, which can be for an exhibition or a catalogue, which run for 2 to 3 years, sometimes a little bit longer. And then there are long-term projects which last sometimes for an entire career. And some people have been working on various projects for 10 plus years. And we work with often focused on works in our collection. It's often collaborative, and we want to share it with a wider audience. So that's it. Talking to you today is part of our outreach and sharing the research we do. It's not sharing the granular details of the research, but it's sharing with you how we approach our research so that you can hear how one institution does it. So I just want to bring in everybody to the conversation and open it up by just asking how do we choose a research topic?
So, yeah.
Narayan, may I back it up just a tiny bit?
Yeah.
Just say that under Narayan's leadership, I think research has really floated to the top of our department's priorities. As he said, this is part of our institutional mission, but at the same time, Narayan's emphasis on this has really strengthened our department. And I think he could see better than the rest of us the benefit of our pursuing and spending time to do research, how it helps us individually as professionals, departmentally, and then institutionally as a museum. So even though that's always been part of what we do, it's in the name of our department, our being given the space, under Narayan's kind of declaration and restatement of the importance of research has really been a big change and an important good change.
I'll jump in to answer Narayan's question about how these research projects get generated. I made a list of kind of the most recent ones from the last 10 years, including our postgraduate fellows. So all the labs have fellows in them who have graduated from conservation training programs and are with us for kind of their 4th or 5th year of postgraduate training. So I listed the ones that the conservators have done and the ones the fellows have done. And in our lab, in the paper conservation lab at least, they're all generated except for one by exhibitions. They start as an exhibition idea. So even the long-term project of looking at Islamic and Indian manuscripts started with the Calderwood exhibition in 2013. So that's where I think the vast majority of our projects in paper conservation, our research projects, come from. They are started by the curators kind of reaching out to us. Usually it's that way that the curators start the conversation and have some questions, and we look at the object lists and have other questions, and that's how they're born in our lab.
And that's when they're most fruitful, I think. Oh, sorry, please.
No, just so when you said that these started as exhibition ideas, So these are they're not exhibitions related to technical analysis or conservation. They're exhibitions as curatorial exhibitions. Like, okay.
That's right. Yeah, they're generally, there's one, on printmaking. There's one on the artist Sheriko. There's been one, obviously the one about print shotoku was definitely always had technical studies embedded in it from the beginning. But all of the other ones that I've sort of listed, Karita Kent and her prints, they've kind of come out of reviewing the list with the curators, and either we have questions or they have questions or both, but they're not technically focused exhibitions generally.
Yes, Kate, sorry, I interrupted.
Well, I think we're in our institution, and I think this is a growing trend as materiality becomes more of the emphasis in our history. But in our institution, we're very fortunate to have a lot of curatorial partners that are already fairly well versed in materials and techniques of art and are interested in finding out more about those things, interested in being informed in their own scholarship by the material and techniques of their collections, so that we're in an environment where the kind of questions we can answer or pose are interesting to those of our colleagues that are putting on exhibitions or who are considering things for acquisition, so that we're able to, we have these conversations a lot. What can we learn? What can conservation learn from the objects, and what can we then offer to curatorial from our historical perspective to enrich their understanding? So it's a happy marriage in that way, because that's not always that relationship has to be established, for those questions to be asked. But the most fruitful research, we're always mining exhibitions or loans or different things for ideas for our fellows to do research projects to teach them. And the most fruitful examples are ones that are engaging with questions that the curators already have, so that their fellows can work with our fellows. And so it's when we can make it something that everyone's interested in, that we're doing it, that gives it a larger meaning. And that's when it's the most fun.
If I can just jump in on that, what Kate's touching on is that it's a very collaborative process. So we have curators who have questions, but they work closely with the conservators. And then inside the conservation department, we have a laboratory with scientists who can help answer questions as well. So you have scientists, conservators, and curators all working together with questions about an object, and we can all add to the understanding of the work of art. We can answer different types of questions about it. And so working together gives us a more rounded understanding of how the object's made, what the object is used for, and different ways that when it's in an exhibition, it provides different entry points for the audience to look at an object as well.
I'll say that we have this established in our institution, that we're knowledgeable about the different disciplines here. So I understand what a curator does to an extent, and they're actually aware of our capabilities and how, as Kate said, we can enrich their work. We can inform their art historical interpretations of artworks, for example. So that groundwork has to be laid and kind of cultivated, I think, because curators have to be knowledgeable and open and curious to what we do. I think, as I agree with Kate, that those are the most fruitful partnerships. But it starts with their even knowing and understanding what it is we do. So the more that we're able to share it, it kind of begets further projects and further questions, not all of which we don't always have the answers, but at least it is a kind of partnership and collaboration, as Narayan says.
And I think if it's all right, maybe a decade ago, our fellows projects were a little bit more freeform, but it has become part of the mission of the museum that we do this kind of work, that even our fellows, but also the conservators, we all work in collaboration. That's tightened up a bit and only led to what Angela's speaking about, this kind of circle where it just reinforces itself. But the projects in the past, some of our fellows would work on things that they just were kind of interested in that weren't necessarily related to an exhibition or something that we were acquiring. And that focus has really changed in the last, I don't know, would you say maybe decade? So it's just kind of great confluence of everything kind of coming together curatorially, conservation-wise, and in terms of our mission.
And
So what was it like before?
It was very loosey-goosey. It was, people would just come along, they would like say, I'm curious about this, and they would just like go through storage, and it was free form sort of thinking. And in a way, what it did was put a lot of pressure. Not carrying out a research project is quite a complicated business, and we try and guide people through that process. But if you come in not knowing what you want to do, and you have to think up a project from the start and how to manage that and work your way through it, it can, you can get a little bit of brain freeze as well. You can like suddenly go like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How do I make my mark on the research world? This is my one chance. And we had that not everybody is cut out for that kind of research. So what we're doing now is giving more structure so that people can get a feeling about how to do a research project. And I think, what we've been saying is that it's most effective when it fits into a larger scheme, when we're not doing something just for ourselves. It's not me-search, it's, research. And excuse my puns. And it's really, fits into a larger, you're doing something for the institution, not for yourself. And I think that actually is the most rewarding. And I think it's true about a lot of different parts of life. Public service is good because you're doing something for the greater good of society. And I think thinking about doing something for the greater good is an important way of thinking about research as well.
Call it the so what question a lot, casually speaking, but we can do a lot of really fascinating things and learn all kinds of fascinating information that we love to know about. But there has to be a reason why we do it, or else you could just spin off into the information universe forever and not necessarily do it for a reason. So we have to remember to ask ourselves, so what?
I think the focus that Narayan's referring to with our choices of topics also comes from, our having to prioritize our work and justify our use of our time and resources, because research is very time consuming. You can't do it by yourself, so you're claiming other people's time as well. And so when there's an institutional need for it, it complements an exhibition or other projects happening in the museum, in our museum, people can get behind it. It might be a very small research question to begin with, and it might grow or it might not, but it is serving a greater question and purpose. And I think as the researcher or part of the research group, you feel like you're part of a team with a purpose. You're not making it up, as Narayan said. And there's kind of less at stake too. I think there's less pressure because you're part of a group being asked to investigate a question. And hopefully you find something. You might not, but it still has a purpose. And even if you don't find something, it is a kind of finding. You don't discover the smoking gun. You can reveal that there's nothing there, or from what we see, we can't make conclusions about this question. And that's important as well.
Right, Angela. So from what we are voicing, it's very interesting for me, particularly in our context. So I have a few questions that have come up now. So one of the first thing is that when we talked about that this is initiating from exhibition, and then we talked about curators being informed and about how we handhold each other on this. So what happens? Does the curator think of an exhibition and come up with the questions themselves? If they are informed and initiated, yes, they might think of something, but does it also mean sometimes a little proactive aspect from your side that you have a conversation with the curator and say, hey, you know what, by the way, this is going to be very interesting if you work out like this, and then it flowers into something else, because then the whole thing gets curated. Also, the science also gets curated in the process. So does that happen also? Do you proactively engage with them, or it's not that they just come up to you and say, hey, you know what,
Once in a while they do, but usually it's kind of bolstered and encouraged on our part. We do get involved with exhibitions and loans, or even a curator's research early on, I think, and we look together, and it might be a question of like, was this always black? Is this now faded? Something very basic like that. It might be just examining the condition of an object, where we say, this wasn't always this way, or this looks like it's changed, or there's been some kind of intervention, or this is just wear, and we find that acceptable or not. So I think, we're always on the lookout for it because we're curious and excited to do new projects. But we do kind of, try to encourage curatorial questions, or maybe they have a question that they don't know could be investigated from our angle, from the material angle. So they don't do it on their own. I don't want to give them all the credit.
So
there's also a semi-spontaneous organic quality. So for example, if something is going to be used for exhibition and it requires treatment, it needs to be cleaned or stabilized in some way. So we begin, so often, at least for paintings, I often begin by, okay, we're going to be working on this picture to make it ready. And as a part of our process, our documentation, which is, we do a baseline of technical imaging. Often as we get better acquainted with the object, questions are raised in our mind. Why does it look like this or whatever? So sometimes we'll start to do a bit of a deep dive as a result of treatment, which did not initially require research or study. And then something can rise to the surface, and we can inform the curator at that point, hey, we're just starting to discover something interesting. Do you want to know more? So often it's like we don't know until we get into something that there might be something to be interested in. And so it's a matter of keeping them apprised of what we're learning as we're learning it. And then sometimes that organically can become something more. Sometimes it's just an interesting write-up for the file, but there have been multiple occasions where we end up working an ex-radiograph into an exhibition or something because of what we've learned without realizing we were going to do that.
Sorry, Narayan.
No, I was going to say we had an exhibition a few years ago called the Philosophy Chamber, based on the first museum at Harvard. And each of the labs produced an essay for that catalogue, and it came out of the work exactly like Kate described. There was a bust that was being cleaned by someone in Angela's lab, and he wrote an essay about it. You're on mute, Anupam.
Could you say that again? Because I think it's very, very important for this conversation that is happening. Just this little aspect about the essays, because I think some of us might have missed it.
Yeah. So we worked on an exhibition which was based around the first museum at Harvard, and in preparing objects for the exhibition, we found very interesting things. So Tony Siegel in Angela's lab found a lot out about this unusual code stone material that was used for casting a bust, as well as the number of layers of paint that were on it. And that gave us an insight into the history. And it was important because this was a sculpture given to us by Benjamin Franklin, who was an important figure in American history. Kate's lab did an interesting study on a painting of one of the Hancocks. And we learned a lot about the evolution of when the painting was first done and how that was adjusted to fit in. It was a very flamboyant painting in the first place, and then it was adjusted to fit into the very sober, puritanical taste of Boston at the time. And Penley's lab did a work on a very large drawing that was in an unusual condition and related to actually, you might need to fill me in a little bit about the Dayton Rock essay, because I can't give it up in a nutshell, but.
It was a very large drawing that was traced from the Dayton Rock. And I think the essay kind of focused on how that tracing was done and the materials and techniques that were used. And Andresi worked closely with Georgina on that, didn't she?
She did. And so what we have is the work that was done to prepare something for an exhibition proved to be interesting enough to write up into essays and include into the catalogue itself.
And that wasn't the original plan for the catalog, but as it emerged, we really have to get this. This is great stuff, and it got added.
It might be the first time that all 3 labs have contributed to an exhibition catalog, so it's pretty unusual. But another outcome can be like gallery talks. A number of us have written wall labels, like a wall label here or there from a technical study. And sometimes people have written small entries in catalogs. Did I already say that one? Catalog entries. So it can be an essay, or it can be just something like a label or a short gallery, a short catalog entry. It's all kinds of things are born from this kind of research.
And
I like the way you said it. Lots of things are born from this research, because I find this, it's got my attention because this is a time in India, if you're talking in this context, there are so many museums that are coming up. There are so many exhibitions in line, especially on this 75 years of independence sort of festival that's being organized. And there's a profusion of museums who are taking out exhibitions, and private galleries. Everybody's coming out of this hiatus, so to speak, from this COVID. And it's fantastic what you say, because if there are so many exhibitions happening, that means all of them have the possibility of some seeds of research, some essays, gallery talks, as you said, related to the materiality of it, related to the other aspects of it, which very honestly, they're not on the radar when these things are designed. And so the onus lies on all the curators across this beautiful country to maybe bring it into their fold, to why not have a conversation about it? It may flower into something, it may not, but at least to begin it. And at the same time, I think if the conservation community in India also sort of proactively starts having a conversation with even the galleries, even if they go for a gallery opening, or, that's too late, but maybe for the next exhibition, then I think if we could engage with everybody, I think what a flowering. Yeah. And eventually what a harvest. Yeah.
I think that would be that would be amazing.
That would be amazing. I think we'll launch a program on this. What a beautiful idea. I'll share the program with you. We'll make a proposal. I'll share it with you.
Please do.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
It's so important to, what we're talking about really is sharing what we find. And what Angela said, and I wanted to thank you earlier about, how things have changed since I've been the director of the Straus Center, is that we have put this emphasis on research, but it's one thing to do the research, it's another thing to make people aware that you're doing it. And we have to get the word out there. And what we've been doing is we go to conferences and we give talks at conferences. So we reach maybe 1,000 people at a time at a conference. We write essays in catalogs. And so there might be 2,500 people who buy the catalog. Sometimes we're in the popular press a lot, and that can reach a lot of people. The internet, the stories about the pigments have been viewed by probably 18 million people, which is an unbelievable amount. If we get into something like the New Yorker, that reaches 2 million people. So we have a lot of different ways of reaching audiences about the work that we do. And it's part of our thinking is how to reach those audiences. And one of the things that I had said when I became the director is that each lab must produce one publication or give a talk at a conference or have some form of like recordable outreach per year. And that was a minimum. And we exceed that. We do more than that all the time. So even setting what I thought was a reasonable bar proved that we can get so much out there.
Narayan, I think it's great to, maybe it might be good to talk about, we do very intentionally share our work, but why is that important? And that can help us figure out how we do it. I feel like, when we've given talks, it really does bolster and inform your research. I mean, you have other people asking you questions, or they've done complementary work and they're willing to share it. So it kind of enhances the work you've already done. And then among non-specialists, it sparks their interest and their support, whether it's just from their attention and they're sharing it if they're teachers or the members of the public. Institutionally, it kind of justifies our time spent on research. I think because it gives back to the department as well as the institution. It gives back this very substantive, public outreach and attention that shows that how we sort of stand apart and how we put our collections and our resources to work, which then kind of engages, fundraising for us and, more and more support. So it's cyclical in a couple of different ways, I think. I feel like it's helpful to think about that purpose of sharing even before the, publications and talks and gallery talks.
Narayan, yeah, please, Kate.
One thing that keeps occurring to me too is that what I love about the content that conservators produce and technical art historians produce is the humanizing factor. So that this is the fact that we focus on materials, how things are made and what they were made of, always implies a person making them. It's this humanizing element. And I think that's what can be really great for audiences, maybe non-typical audiences, is that this art was made by someone for us to see, and it's to be very sort of broad and philosophical about it. That's what's so beautiful, and I think it helps people connect. And so the ultimate so what question for me in our work is that we have a way of humanizing art and cultural heritage for everybody else.
So this approach that is there, so if you're talking about the Straus Center, is it something that sort of germinated here a little more than at other places? Of course, comparisons are odious. We're not comparing anything, but how does it go generally across the continent? Is it a conscious sort of approach, if not a strategy amongst institutions? Are people conscious of this fact that this is how we can, bring the East and the West in this sense of the term together? The curatorials, the humanities and the sciences together? Is it a conscious effort? Is it something that is catching on, so to speak? Or is it going to catch on?
I see it as a trend right now. What do you think, Narayan?
Yeah, I totally agree. It is a trend. And maybe 20 years ago, there was a big leaning. There's a pendulum that moves backwards and forwards. And 20 years ago, it was very much about theory. And people like TJ Clark, it was like all theory, or the objects were almost secondary to the theory. And it's swung back now so that people are very invested in understanding the material nature of art. So that's something that changes. That's a fashion. But what we've been able to do is stay true to our mission. And so in a sense, and I think this is very true to Harvard, we're completely unfashionable. And I think that's a good way of being, we've got a course that we're on and we stay with it because we believe in it. We're not changing. And so the optics, the sort of roving searchlight of fashion hits us sometimes and misses us, but we're always doing the same work. And one of the things that we do as well is work very closely with young curators and young conservators and young scientists. And what they learn with us is something that they take with them throughout their career. So we've got people who've done great projects. I'm just thinking, for example, in Kate's lab, we've got a young curator who's very interested in 19th century art. She worked with a conservator who came to us from Australia, who's gone back to Australia. And they have brought great energy to the projects that they worked on. And when they leave the museum, so Ruby, who's the Australian, went back to Australia where conservation science is not very strong. And she's able to see what science can do at Harvard. She can then talk about it in Australia when she's gone back. And Sophie, who's a curator, has seen how much, conservation and science can bring to her understanding of the art that she's passionate about. And so in her career, she takes that forward with her, and she's able to share, and presumably she's going to have a long career. So she may end up being a museum director. And
100%.
and if she's a museum director, then she can support the department and the science department as part of her initiatives. So it's, we're taking the long-term view, and the Straus Centre's had a lot of very important directors come through the department as art historians. So people like Tom Lentz or Jim Cuno or Glenn Lowry or Michael Brand, all these people have had close contact when they were at Harvard with the Straus Centre. And then that's informed how they operate as museum directors in other institutions. That's quite a long, rambly answer, but I think it touches on what your question was.
Yes, it does, Narayan. It does. And then, so, I mean, of course, now, as this is happening, there are also challenges that, there are certain things that, that probably you face when you, so see, there are two aspects. One is the aspect about, embedding research into exhibitions. That's how the conversation started, right? But other than this, embedding conservation and technical studies into exhibitions or from exhibitions, what about suo moto research that you take up? So there is research that is because of an impetus of an external event that is happening and you would like to engage with it, right? What about things that you take up on your own as individuals? Individually, what is it that inspires you to take up something as an this is a very personal type of an answer, it is not a generalized answer. What is it that particularly drives you to pick up a topic for research? Is there anything particular or?
Thinking of the Appear project as a good example. I mean, there's the ancient panel painting examination and research project that the Getty started around the ancient, the Roman Egyptian funerary portraits, of which there are only about 1,000. We have 5 of them in our collection. And there's this international group of institutions that are gathering lots of technical information into a centralized sort of database to better study these objects about which we know very little. So it's hard to resist an opportunity to contribute to something larger. Particularly, there's a responsibility to do so when you hold some of those objects in your collection. They're also just beautiful and captivating. So being able to spend time studying their materials and techniques is a lot of fun. But we have, between myself and then Kathy and Georgina in the Conservation Science Lab, 3 of us have contributed a lot of our work, professional time to that research over a number of years, a lot of time. It's actually also produced a special exhibition within the museum as a sort of a side effect or an end result or a culmination of that work. So part of it is just what's going on in the world, I suppose. It's because it's sometimes it's something like that. There's this other thing happening and we've put our oar in with it.
Okay, so to put a pointed question across to you, as a layperson, someone who's not into art conservation or into the sciences of it, and I see this happening, and I ask you, Kate, what is it that sort of made you pick up a certain research project which you have enjoyed doing? What is it that, was it because it was a larger project and you wanted to be part of it, or about contributing to things? But what is it in your heart that made you, let's do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if there's a question that you can answer, if there's a question because you have the object and the answer lies in the object. We've discovered paintings below the surface of paintings, for example, and you can see a ghost of that in an X-radiograph, but you want to know more. You want to have a better answer than what you found. There's a sense of discovery and revelation, I suppose, and the fact that the object is the only thing that can tell you that story. So you, as in working with that object, are the one that's going to bring any kind of illumination out. There's a sense of discovery that's really exciting and really hard to resist. Actually, when Narayan talks about the idea of a research project and the shape of it, we're always talking about project creep. I could literally spend the rest of my life going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into something. And so if you're not careful and set boundaries, you could become obsessed with one painting and learn about every particle. And that's not a reasonable way to live. But that's the dark side. And the light side is that that's just fun to do, fun to discover things, mysteries.
So, I mean, it's open to all the panelists, some pet project of yours or some passion project of yours. But what I'm really interested to know as a layperson completely, with no idea about this field, is what is it that made you do it? So for you, from what I see, what you said, Kate, is about maybe that sense of discovery or sense of, a little spark of that, like a child also inside you, a bit of curiosity, not in the, as a term curiosity, but, the sense of adventure, something. Okay, so that's one of them. I mean, anybody else, if you have something in mind that made you do something, from your heart, what was it?
Anupam, I'll talk about the Shotoku sculpture a little bit, because my past with it goes back many years when I first encountered it in a box on the floor in a storage room. And it's such a captivating object, aesthetically. And I think just these basic questions of like, what is this? Like, who made this? Where did this come from? Why is it here in a box on the floor? Why aren't we showing it? These just basic questions of curiosity. And I think over time I learned how a lot of staff members just thought, oh, that's my favorite object in the collection. They just seen it and they felt a connection to it. And maybe there's some, the nature of this being a Buddhist object helps, I don't know, but it's this baby, it's very serious, what's going on, he has these eyes. And all these people who said, that's my favorite object, they knew nothing about it. They didn't know it was hollow. They didn't know it contained all of these things, that it had this other, 700-year history of being alive. And so I think I just always knew it. And then when we had a curator and an opportunity to look more into it, I don't know, maybe I was passively waiting for this chance. So I was able to jump on that and make it a bigger thing. I mean, that project came from a curator having some basic questions, but it really was up to us to grow it in the way that we wanted. We could have just said, oh, no, we don't find any evidence of that, we're all set. But instead, it kind of, branched off into many questions. It branched off into finding a huge array of other experts with related backgrounds who could help us. So I think there's a little personal investment and passion in all of these projects, because we could cut them off much earlier than we do. And sometimes we don't. As Kate said, it can be problematic. But it also begets itself. You get excited, you get a little rush from little findings, or a very complementary research partner who can drive you to understand the impact of what you can find or what you can't find.
So how important are research partners? How important are they?
I mean, they're everything, right? We only bring one piece of it. So we need our conservation science colleagues, our curatorial colleagues. We need other experts in the field. We spend a lot of time like trolling through the research, the writing, trying to figure out like who is the specialist on, bookworms, or who is the specialist on a particular wood ID or something. We really do need our experts in related fields. It's a very important part.
So sometimes this team, the research team, grows organically, I suppose, and sometimes it is premeditated right at the beginning. Yeah, what usually works better? Is there something? I mean, you can't generalize, but I suppose both work.
I think it starts with acknowledging your limits, your own limits.
Very good. Very good.
Personally and professionally, that
very nice.
You can't figure out everything, and there are people who spent a lifetime studying the aspect that you're in need of. So those complementary and willing experts is a really critical part of this.
Complementary and willing experts. Yeah, willing is also important.
Yeah, we'll go give a talk and someone in the audience will really help us out. They'll say, oh, actually, I've seen that somewhere, and send a source or make a connection for us, or I know this colleague who might be able to help you. So that's a huge part of, like, we have these partners in the beginning and throughout, but then when you finally get to present it, you're still learning, you're still getting a lot of help and collaboration from your colleagues out there in the field.
And as conservators working with an encyclopedic collection, you know, for me, one year I'm working on an ancient Egyptian portrait, and the next year I'm working on an 18th century Italian painting. So I have to be ready for everything, and I can never be the expert on anything. And that's not how I work anyway. So you have to find those people to do intelligent work.
A lot of people in the audience may like to ask some questions also. So before we do that, what are the common sort of you see, whenever there's a development in something, whether there's a surge forward, there is also a backwash, right? So what are the things that sort of show resistance to efforts like this? What is the pattern of things that one should be expecting when one is launching into research about something? Are there a few things that are common?
So I'm gonna just share with you an interesting observation that I had when I was working on a study of Australian Aboriginal bark paintings. There was a generally understood fact, which turned out not to be true, that there was no binding medium, that these were just pigments that were locked onto the surface of bark. And so when we set out on this project, which was a big research project, people were saying, why are you wasting your time? And as it turns out, there was binding medium, and we were able to find all different kinds of things about it. It changed the entire narrative of bark painting in Australia. But what we had to do is work against a received wisdom that wasn't true. And so that was a really hard thing to do. You know, people will say, this is a fact, we know this is a fact. And the thing is that science is really just a declaration of where things stand at this moment, and they change all the time. So the chemistry that I learned in college, which was a long time ago now, is not the science that's being taught to students at college right now. So, you know, we have to be prepared to keep learning and not to get fixed in our ways. I think that's an important thing. That's another way of saying what you just said.
Right.
I suppose not everyone is interested in materials and techniques. You can't. That's okay too. There's so many different ways to study cultural heritage, right? So if someone isn't interested, it's not gonna become a conversation. And if it's not gonna become a conversation, then you know what I mean. So that it's not that there's always this beautiful collaborative spirit, and sometimes that's just how it is.
And you know, I think it's open to everybody here who's in the audience to also, you know, who listen to this conversation to chip in with their own thoughts and ideas. And this is a conversation. These are really not questions, answers. These are comments that members in the audience would have. So I'll just invite anyone and everyone here to, you know, just generally, if you raise your hands, it's even better if you speak your questions out. I think, you know, we're all part of one conversation. until some hands, Selman, will you be able to see the hands that go up? Or do you want people to type in the?
We can do either. They are attendees are allowed to raise their hands, and then we can call on them to speak using their microphone. Like we can unmute them, or they can also submit questions via the chat or the Q&A function. So if people are able to speak, they can speak. If they can write in their questions, they can write in.
Shibu Nair has one question. She says, "What are the significant limitations of art research from perhaps your experience?"
I mean, one very big limitation we haven't spoken about is time, right? We all work in very, very busy labs with exhibition pressures and acquisition pressures and lots of meetings to go to. So, I mean, I think one significant limitation that I experience, and I assume my colleagues do, is, how do you carve out the time? It's not the most burning thing that's going on in the lab every day. There's always, someone who needs something today. So how do you carve out the time and devote the time to something that can go to the back burner a little bit?
That's a very, very good question, Shibu.
And there's also funding as well, which is another limitation. We need money to do research, and something that we do often is get funding from private organizations, institutions, and that helps us enormously. So people, the publications help us reach an audience who then want to support what we do. But one of the limitations that we've found is that it's very difficult to get government support for projects. So even though, people might think, you're Harvard, you get access to everything, getting support from the government has been really, really difficult. And you end up in grant proposals, you submit them, and then, it's like watching a bad YouTube video. You don't get that time back. It's totally wasted. 2 weeks is gone and you get nothing for it. So there are limitations about who will support your work, and then how you embrace that as well, how you cultivate that support.
So how does one address
just may I say?
Yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. I think if I just can add, these time and money constraints are real and are making a priority of research is important. So at the same time, I think it's possible that these constraints can help your research. They can put a limit on the scope that you're going to pursue, or you can decide not to do it altogether. It can help you prioritize, because sometimes there are so many things that are tempting to do and calling for you. So it can be a good thing to help you focus in some cases.
Yeah, I think if you impose a question at the beginning, a hypothesis or a thesis at the beginning of your research, then you have to answer that at the end of it. And that creates a narrative arc that you can answer. And that provides constraints for your research, because you then are deciding whether the extra work that you're thinking about answers that one question. And that's especially important for shorter projects, needing that structure. So that's a self-imposed limitation, but it can actually be very helpful in keeping a project on track.
And because we supervise our fellows projects, we really have to implement that all the time. So we really have to work with them so their project stays on course. And that's something then you can transfer to your own project. You can hear yourself saying, what is my research question? Is this careening out of control? So stay focused.
So, but when someone comes up in this context, if they say, there is a statement which is often unsaid, but it is implied, is that, what's the point of doing all this research? I mean, what's the point? I mean, why? Are you able to quantify your work in some way monetarily or something to justify? Do you ever do that? Or do we always do it in terms of the intangibles and the value and the significance?
So I think, you know, we can quantify it in the number of publications that we produce or the number of lectures we give. But we also, because it's in the mission of the museum, research is considered to be something that it's the museum business, you know, like making money is the business of a bank, and doing research in a university art museum is the business of what a university does. And so I think that's, you know, we don't have to address that in a way, but we can also look at it as providing enhanced value for the work of art. The more you understand a work of art, the more valuable it becomes. And so what we're doing is enhancing our understanding of a work of art. And then by doing so, we make it more valuable. We understand more about the whatever culture it is that made it, the artist that made it. You know, we're learning more and more about it and enhancing its value that way.
Yeah, I'll say that just to bring back what Kate was mentioning before about how looking at art from the material side can engage audiences, because we think about the people and we've all made things, and we can engage with our artwork and our culture in that way. We're all working with art that will have a longer life than all of us. So we're just kind of putting into the pot a little bit more information, a few more questions, and a way that our audiences and students can look and ask their own questions about our works of art. So it adds a kind of immeasurable value, I think, and justification to why we're protecting and holding these objects in our collections for the parts of our lifetimes and for their lifetimes.
Such good questions in the chat. I'm reading them.
So there's, would you like to ask this question, Sanjay? I'll read out the question if Sanjay, okay, so let's go to Sanjay's question here. So Sanjay Dhar is also, I mean, all of you probably know Sanjay Dhar. He's one of the pioneer figures for art conservation here across India, and a fantastic colleague and a very, very fine person, golden heart. He says, as conservators and conservation scientists, how can we initiate questions for curatorial research much in the same way as curators do? Or is a supportive role too well defined? So here we are going on an assumption that the curators initiate questions. So he's saying that as conservators also, how do we do that? Or is our supportive role too much defined?
To me that different institutions have different personalities in this kind of divide. And I think the Harvard Art Museums, we're really able to, I mean, we more and more, I feel like we're really at the table and being part of the conversations around what we want to think about or study. We're not, you know, I think it's happening more and more. I don't think that's true everywhere, but I think it's also true in other institutions. It kind of depends on where you are and what the culture is. And maybe we can start talking.
So sorry to interrupt, but let's put it across this way, the question that, let's say from the example of the Straus Center, what are some questions that that Straus Center initiated for the Harvard Art Museum?
Okay, so I can answer a couple of those right off the bat. The first is about plastics that are in the collection, and that is a question that was pressing. It's about the care of the collection, and to look after the plastic material in the collection, you need to understand what it is. So we said, this is not properly catalogued, this is not properly documented, we need to understand it, otherwise we're putting our collections at risk. And we've been doing a multi-year, it's a long-term project, and you heard last year, or maybe earlier this year, from Georgina Rayner and Susan Costello about the work they've been doing. And that was an initiation from our department. And we really push that forward. That was very important. And another project that we put forward was the work on the Rothko murals. And you heard me talk about that. So we had what was perceived to be an unsolvable problem. And we set about how do we address this issue, which we don't know how to solve it, but we're going to do what we can. And it came from the conservation department first. And then we brought on board curators once we knew that we had a solution to the problem. And so there is room for that. And we can bring forward ideas and talk to them. And part of that is that I report directly to the director of the museum. And so if we have things that we think are important, we can talk directly to a leader and say, these are things that I think, need to be addressed in the care of the collection.
I see. So as conservators, you take the initiative of going to the head of the institution and saying, this is a real thing and this needs to be addressed. And then, it's also important then how to articulate it and how to communicate it.
Absolutely.
And I suppose intrinsically human beings are reasonable. So if there is a line of logic and mutual...
You're very optimistic, Anupam.
I think we can initiate more easily questions of preservation. So it's something that no one else would see, like this question about plastics, that there's a need to identify the specific plastic types in order to preserve them the best, to give them the best conditions to stay alive. In other cases, I think the questions that when we are looking at objects, looking at the condition, looking at how something is made, those basic questions can spark research as well. I'm thinking of Sue Costello's research on Junware, which is imperial ceramics made in China. I believe she presented on this. Did she? I don't remember. But these are these highly valued objects for which we have many in our collection. They're really beautiful, and I think their value, kind of art historically speaking, has overshadowed this question about how they're made. And I think her investigation, along with our conservation science colleagues, of how do you even get a glaze to look like this, grew into a collaboration with our ceramics program here at Harvard. So we engaged potters in this and how they made things, how they glazed things. And we realized that through this basic question, why is this so beautiful? How is this made? That it was not understood. It was not previously really published and thoroughly investigated about how these glazes were made, that there are these optical effects, that we have access to instrumentation that's state of the art, that it's sort of the only way you can investigate some of these different oxidation states specifically for these glazes. So this is an example of an initiated research topic from conservators and conservation scientists that really did add to the value to how we regard these already very special ceramics as something else.
So taking from what you said and to pick up that little bit in Sanjay's question also, there's one part of his question that said, or are our roles too well defined? So I don't know, do you generally feel, having worked in the profession for so long, that conservators need to redefine the thing a little bit? Because so this thing about our perception that our role is only to do this or this or this, you think this is something worth thinking about in the months to come, about redefining the roles of conservators so they can consciously feel they should get into this aspect also?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a fundamental part of any institutional program, is understanding the roles and responsibilities of each person and how they contribute to the running of the institution. And so those periodically have to be redefined. And so I think that's a really important part, being able to expand the work that you do. because otherwise you're sneaking it in or doing it after hours, or trying to do something extra without affecting your job. So you do need to define research as part of your job. That's an important aspect in carrying out research.
It does start with that question, though, which I think is such a good one. What is my role? Has my role changed? Can it change? Do I have other capabilities that can serve my job and my institution well? I think it has to be done carefully, though, if you're going to expand and grow, because as Kate was referring to, your cultural kind of the personality and the history of your institution. Some places might ask you to stay in your lane more strictly than others. But I think it can be done respectfully. It can be, there are overlapping areas in our institutions that we don't always acknowledge can be very rich.
Fantastic. Really nice.
Yeah, you can find collaborators in other museums and say, if your museum doesn't want you to do research, but you find collaborators in another museum who are doing that kind of work, maybe you can convince your museum to participate in a project that they're part of. There are ways around it. It's not a linear process. And things evolve. And I'm just thinking of Penley's project with the Indian and Islamic pigments. That started off as an exhibition, but it's been going for almost 10 years now. And it turned into an amazing project looking at pigments across time and geography. And it's developed initiatives with Gina Kim in the history of art and architecture. It's, you're part of this bigger project, Anupam. It's a project that started off as one thing and it evolved into something else. And if a project can do that, then I think the job of a conservator can also do that as well.
Very good. That was a beautiful question. And that second line was also important. Thank you very much. I think this has flagged a very, very important point. I feel it has. And there are some questions that have been talking about, we have touched upon it to some extent, but there is this thing that, given the differences in training of conservators, scientists, and art historians, what are the other attitudes necessary for a fruitful collaboration? Is there anything that we feel there should be some commonality or something that we should? When speaking to experts outside your field, what are the other attitudes you feel that are necessary for fruitful collaboration?
Listening. I mean, because the training is so different that our brain structures are different and our ways of approaching it. So I feel like a conservator's role often, because this is my own, but because we tend to be, our work is naturally somewhat collaborative internally with our, even when I work on a painting on paper, I'm always having to talk to Penley about, so we're always collaborating anyway. I feel like we end up being a fulcrum of communication to some degree. So there's this sort of empathy that you need and listening, because we're used to not knowing everything because we can't, and so when dealing with someone who's an absolute specialist, who's used to knowing the answers, it's very uncomfortable often for people with that type of training to come into an arena where they may not know what you're talking about. And so it's about inviting people into that way of thinking.
So going further from your question and then picking up Meena's comment that says, piggybacking on Sanjay's question, has Straus collaborated with conservators outside Harvard Art Museums? And what did they find useful?
For the Shotoku paper, because I'm not an expert in Asian paper, I definitely collaborated with my colleagues at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So that's just a very simple, straightforward example. But I think all of us collaborate all the time with our colleagues in other institutions or private that have expertise that we don't, but they are conservators or conservation scientists. We're very much in touch with the Museum of Fine Arts in general, always back and forth.
And are there any consortiums for art research? Are there? There's a question from a participant.
I think we have regular professional meetings. The American Institute for Conservation has an annual meeting, and 1,000 conservators, 1,200 conservators get together in one place at one time. And that's a great way to meet and talk about people, find out what's going on. And you can sometimes find collaborators that way. You know, if you find that there are people doing the same kind of work, it's a really good opportunity. But I wanted to just touch on something else too that you mentioned, which is, you know, when we're approaching collaborators, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is what is it that they need from this project? Like, I know what I need, but we need to also think what the collaborator needs as well. And it's an important part of a negotiation to think about how we can both work together, but then come away from this project and both have got what we want, which are often quite different things.
True. True, and so relevant. So I suppose research has gone into it. Dhruv is here, Dhruv Chandrasud. Dhruv, actually research has been in various aspects, from paintings to archives to collection housekeeping. There's a whole slew of subjects that have been touched upon. There's one from Bhaskar. We have, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 6-7 minutes for the closure of this session. So I'll take a few questions, just one or two. One of them is, Bhaskar asks, he says, relating to the philosophy of conservation, it says, how can research and outreach, both research and outreach, how can these ensure that the communication is immune to claiming a selective past, something that modest nation states? I can't read the whole thing. Let me try to bring it here.
That question.
Wow, it's taking me time to understand the question. Where are we? Here we are. Okay. How can research and outreach ensure that the communication is immune to claiming a selective past, something that modern nation states are eager to do? Let me see the second one. How is information conserved alongside the object? This is largely seen as technology, but it is a matter of time that it becomes a standard practice in conservation. How long might this take to become a standard formal practice? Let's take the second question first. How is information conserved alongside the object?
So important.
And will it become a standard practice? So to put it simply, how is information conserved alongside the object, and would it become a standard formal practice?
If I understand, it's about the documentation and rationale of the work. And I think, you know, in the American Institute for Conservation, in our code of ethics, documentation is a part of the ethical requirement of our work, in terms of it's almost as important as a treatment is how we record what happened and why, written and photographically, and that material is maintained in an archivally sound way, whether it's on paper or digitally. So that metatextual piece is so important, so that the people coming after us will know what we did and why.
But do you see really this happening? Or is it people are getting bored of putting all this documentation together all the time and just finishing off the work?
No,
No,
it's because right, there's a component, but no, it's so hardwired from our very beginning of our training. There's just no, I mean, if it's not done, it's really considered to be a slip, a professional slip. It's because there was a time not that many decades back where documentation was not taken as seriously as it is now, and you lose so much. That I mean, in our institution, we literally see it as important as the work itself. It's absolutely, without question, we have to do it.
it's interesting because
we pull out records from the 1920s, 1930s all the time.
All the time.
I find it a challenge in India getting people to
Agreed.
put their things together in writing, because somehow there is a perception, not just here, but in many colleagues around the world that I've seen, is they say that, we work so much and now to put it all together, like that's, another and it's more boring than actual work, because work
That's
is
right.
fun. And then after the end of the day, now you say, so the choice is either to finish the work or
Get on
spend
to the
half the
next
time
thing.
doing the documentation, because once you do documentation, it's got to be absolutely dot on, because it's forever. So you can't be casual about the documentation, It takes up a lot of energy, it takes up a lot of commitment. But that's interesting what you say, it would be a professional slip, right?
Is
I
it
agree
From
with
our
you,
code of
Anupam.
ethics.
Yeah.
It's we've all encountered treatments from the past that were not properly documented and are so frustrating, and we then have to go and spend a lot of time redoing either analysis or testing, or being in a mystery world of having to figure out what happened because someone didn't write it down. So experiencing that also motivates us to not want to do that to the next person, and it's just the right thing to do, I guess, is you have to think of it that way.
Right.
Because it is
I'll agree
boring.
with you, Anupam, that it is difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it could often be done better, even by all of us who are saying it's how important it is.
Oh, body
I'll say
camera,
that-
what an interesting idea.
I'll say that publications are another way to preserve this information, and it's a way that helps us to kind of button things up and summarize our work and distill the most important parts, and then put it out there in a way that's available to other people.
And the other thing that we are also very conscious of is the format in which we save the documentation. And I'm quite old-fashioned. I think that digital documentation is very important, but I also think keeping some record on paper is also important. We know paper has lasted a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think there's some combination of the two is important.
That's our practice here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be 2100 hours here in India, and we've done beautifully with time, with the auspicious beginning by Salman Rafe. Thank you, Salman. And it's 2100 hours, the clock has just struck. And there are a few questions here, but the questions here, ladies and gentlemen, are related to where can I study conservation, what are the career aspects, and we will be able to answer that. I can just write an email address here for you. It's called, what is our email address? Namrata? Namita?
Just post it in the chat, Anupam.
Yeah, just put it on the chat, so that please write to us and we'll answer those questions related to, how can analysis of surface pigments help and things like that. There are answers to all of them. And in fact, this module 2 is going to address painted surfaces and things like that. So I think I will, this has been a fantastic session, to say the very least, and I have come out so much richer from this. We talked about how projects are generated, and we began from the beautiful thought about the exhibition ideas, about materiality becoming a priority in our curatorial endeavors. It's about the relationships that develop with different people, the questions that the curators have, the questions that the audiences or the end users might have, and the questions that the conservators might have. We talked about different disciplines and how things have to be cultivated. There has to be understanding, and how things have changed from the past decades to the present. And we are also aware that everyone is not cut out for research, but there are piazzas and plazas where we can meet together and have our little conversations. And what is it that motivates us? Some individual things that inspire us, could be passion projects, could be something spiritual. And then we talked about how to use this, how to disseminate it. We talked about, how we write essays about it and things, but we also talked about the limitations and how, very nicely said, Angela, that sometimes these limitations about, they also help us to prioritize our work. So these are all very, very, and the fact is all of you were speaking from your first-hand experiences, and so this was so beautiful. And then we went about the dissemination of it, and that very nice thing that Narayan talked about, how it sort of went on from whether, how many do you reach through a newspaper, how many you reach through online versions of things, and how much through publication, because these are all real aspects of the dissemination of the work that we have done. And we touching about the humanizing elements in these things, and the fact that all this research and bringing these arts and the humanities together is the Straus Center team feels it is a trend. It is a trend, and it is and it's trending, so to speak. So that's very positive. That's extremely positive. And wow, there's so much stuff here. And then we talked about the various challenges, acknowledging our limits. We talked about some practical aspects. I should put all these things down, and beautiful terms like, science is a decoration of things, and, and sometimes so many ways to address and study cultural heritage, our limitations, whether it's time or funding, and the people that we engage with and who will support us for our work. That wonderful little phrase you made about that arc from a hypothesis to this, and sometimes you have to work within that limitation of that arc, and how do we communicate it to others, whether it's through personal interactions or it is through conveying an enhanced value of something, and our mandates as institutions, as museums, as cultural institutions. And that very important fact about our roles, and how it is important for us to acknowledge that we may have to redefine our own roles to make for a larger purpose, out of a sense of purpose, not out of arrogance about what we're going to do. And then we closed with things like the rationale of doing this work, the importance of documentation of this work, and how we need to address it a little more seriously. And all these, in Shakespeare, there was something, and it was, that was something else actually. The fact is that paper is, there were so many questions about paper from people who were in archives asking whether, analysis would help in archives also. As you can see that even this discussion today, going on to contemporary technical analysis, the closing lines were about the importance of that fantastic support, which is paper, which has stood the test of time, and to put everything there in writing. And it sort of, it really exemplifies that things which are good and sound and sincere, I would say, like paper, people come back to it time and time again, and they will continue doing so. And I will pen all these thoughts on paper too. Thank you, Narayan. Thank you, Penley, Angela, the lovely audience, and all the lovely organizers of this course. I can't thank you enough. This has been such a beautiful and rocking launch of this program. Fantastic. That's
Thank you,
fantastic.
Anupam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anupam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anupam, thank you for being such a wonderful, kind, and generous host for the.
No, this was really nice. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Look forward.
Such a pleasure. Take care.
Pleasure meeting all of you. And ladies and gentlemen, some of you who are interested in the module 2, our seats have, there are quite a number of people who applied for the conservation research program. So if there's anybody else who's interested, please write to us. We kept the date till the 21st of November in case somebody's interested in participating in the training program. Thank you very much once again.